P. Diddy leaves the Metropolitan Detention Center jail in Brooklyn. New reports say he was taken to the hospital for a few hours last week to get an MRI. We're just now learning about this, though, because Diddy was taken from the jail late at night, actually using the cover of darkness to keep his trip on the down low.
The news spilling out of the prison system right now has left the entertainment world spinning, and it's not the kind of story anyone saw coming. Sean Diddy Combs, one of the most powerful and untouchable figures in the music industry for decades. Before we continue, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay connected.
Diddy was taken to a Brooklyn hospital from MDC. MDC is the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. It's where Diddy's been held since his arrest back in September. His team has tried multiple times for bail, but it's always been denied. So that's where Diddy has been for months now, but last week he was taken to the hospital. According to reports from the New York Post, Diddy was transported from MDC in the cover of darkness at about 10 p.m. on January 30th. He was taken to a Brooklyn hospital for an MRI after reporting issues with his knee. This actually isn't the first time we've heard about Diddy's knee either. He's apparently had problems with it since 2003 when he ran the New York Marathon. He even had multiple knee surgeries back in 2017. In a now deleted Instagram post, Diddy shared this photo and wrote, quote, "Just had my final knee surgery. They said I'd never run again. I said the devil is a liar, 2 exclamation points. 3 surgeries in 1 year. Third time's a charm, 3 exclamation points. Hashtag rebirth. Don't take the simple things in life for granted. Thank you to all the surgeons and docs and PTs. I thank God for y'all. And hashtag team love, hashtag thank you, hashtag God is the greatest." He also wrote, quote, "God puts us all through things for a reason. It's up to us to learn through the things that he puts us through. Sometimes you have to go through the pain to get to the joy. This journey has brought me closer to God, closer to my family, and most importantly, closer to myself, as this has been God's will." So apparently Diddy's knee has been bothering him recently, so he reported it. At some point, it was decided that he needed medical care outside of the jail, so he was taken to a Brooklyn hospital. He was only gone for a couple of hours and came straight back to MDC after his MRI was finished. Diddy's attorney Mark Agnifilo told TMZ, quote, "I cannot comment on anything related to prisoner movements. Also, I'm not commenting on anything related to possible medical issues." A statement from the Federal Bureau of Prisons was released too. It says, quote, "For privacy, safety, and security reasons, we do not comment on the conditions of confinement for anyone in our custody, to include medical status or medical trips."
Now, after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago, the circumstances have changed. And I will tell you what, we did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations, that's what it's called under the law, they're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases, that the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all
is now living a reality that reads more like a nightmare. Reports are flooding in from multiple inside sources that Diddy was violently ambushed by a group of inmates in what prison officials are already calling a serious security incident. And this wasn't some minor altercation. This wasn't two men exchanging heated words in the yard before throwing a couple of punches. No, witnesses say this was an organized, coordinated, and deliberate attack carried out with the kind of precision that leaves no doubt Diddy was targeted. The attack reportedly took place late in the afternoon, just after Diddy had been moved into a new section of the facility. The reason for the move, according to internal memos, was that it was part of population integration, a standard process where inmates are rotated or shifted into different blocks to maintain order and balance. But for Diddy, this move put him in a place where his high-profile status, his notoriety, and the lingering controversy swirling around his name became a magnet for danger. Multiple witnesses described the scene as quick and brutal. Diddy had just walked into a common area when several inmates,
all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show two conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult long-term girlfriend as part of a demonstrated swingers lifestyle and has been prosecuted and incarcerated under the Mann Act. Combs and two of his longtime girlfriends had a private, intimate life that is not uncommon today. They're talking about Jane and Cassie Ventura. Quote, it may not have been common on June 25th, 1910, when the Mann Act, or as it was originally called, the White Slave Traffic Act, was passed, but attitudes about sex and morality have come a long way in the last 115 years. It is worth noting that when the Mann Act was passed to protect the morals and decency of America's women were not allowed to vote. As noted below, perhaps due to the troubling background of this statute, whose history is rich with both racism and misogyny, the Department of Justice has limited its application to those people profiting financially from the business of prostitution and not using it to prosecute consensual adults for their own lifestyles. By the way, we covered this on a previous sidebar. The defense made an argument months ago to have these charges thrown out, called it basically racially motivated, that it was strange that it was being used against a successful. Combs had threesomes too. When Jane and Combs watched pornography together, Jane testified that she contacted two different porn stars and invited them to join her and Mr. Combs. Both Miss Ventura and Jane testified that very often they would see the same men over and over again for years. In July of 2024, Jane testified, for instance, that she suggested to Mr. Combs that they call Paul. Jane explained that she told Combs she, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, because I did. This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane
approached. There was a brief exchange. No one seems to know exactly what was said. And then, without warning, fists started flying. The sound of impact echoed off the cold, unforgiving concrete walls. By the time nearby guards reacted, the damage had been done. Diddy was on the ground, shielding himself as blows rained down from every direction. Some insiders claim a makeshift weapon was involved, possibly a sharpened piece of metal smuggled in from the workshop. Others insist it was pure fists and kicks, but with the level of coordination and ferocity, it hardly mattered. The end result was the same: severe injuries and a shaken prison administration scrambling to contain the fallout. The injuries, while not officially confirmed by prison spokespeople, are said to include deep cuts, multiple bruises, and at least one suspected fracture. The fact that these details leaked so quickly suggests that people inside the prison, both staff and inmates, want the world to know exactly how far Diddy has fallen from his throne. Now, the motive behind the attack is where things
or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that.
Get truly disturbing. Prison fame is a dangerous currency. On the outside, celebrity status opens doors. On the inside, it paints a target on your back. Some inmates see high-profile prisoners as trophies. Taking one down boosts their own reputation and clout in the prison hierarchy. Others are motivated by resentment, by the belief that celebrities receive special treatment. And then there's the darker theory, whispered among those familiar with both prison politics and the music industry's shadowy side, outside. This wasn't just about proving dominance behind bars, it was a message. A message from whom? That's where speculation runs wild. Could it be connected to rivalries Diddy left unresolved in the music world? Could it be tied to the ongoing legal battles that have exposed decades of behind-the-scenes drama, grudges, and accusations? Or could it be part of the internal prison power struggles where alliances are made and broken overnight? Whatever the reason, the timing is telling. Diddy has been under intense legal and public scrutiny for months now. The walls have been closing in.
That indicates that needs immediate follow-up. You know, the medical team there will follow up immediately. However, if there's some procedures or some sort of medical processes they need to go through that are not available at the institution, or they can't bring someone in like a specialist to come in to do to perform that medical process at the institution, they will schedule medical trips on a monthly basis. And there's a review team that goes over those trips every month. And but this particular process was a little bit different because, as you know, most doctors' offices and most folks that do MRIs and X-rays and things of that nature, they're on a normal work schedule, you know, between, you know, the normal business hours of maybe 10 o'clock and maybe 6 p.m. So in that case, this was a little bit different, getting him outside the facility in the late evening hours to do just, you know, possibly a basic MRI.
Yeah, I was thinking about the timeline too, because I don't ever recall going to the doctor at 10 p.m. at night. As you said, it's usually 9 to 5, 10 to 6 kind of vibes. But for P. Diddy, I can kind of understand why it was at 10 p.m. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking they decided to do this because he's such a high profile name that they wouldn't want to draw attention to it. I mean, this is an unassuming Thursday night around 10 p.m. Could that be why they decided then to go to the hospital?
Yes, and also, I mean, for a couple of reasons, you know, staff, I mean, many correctional agencies are short-staffed, so you're taking someone out with this high-profile person such as P. Diddy. I mean, just the nature of who he is going to cause a serious security concern, because you're going to need to be able to stave off, you know, onlookers, you know, fans, media, and the like. And then you also got to think about the security of the hospital and their operations. I mean, people are there to try to get better. You have families there to visit their loved ones. And the last thing you need is somewhat, you know, a chaotic environment that's causing concern with security. And also, just, you know, most people don't know this, but he's actually under the primary custody. He's a U.S., what we call a U.S. Marshals inmate, because he's on pretrial status. So the Bureau, you know, the agency, the Bureau of Prisons, oversees, you know, the operations with overseeing the inmates on a day-to-day basis. However, you know, when they're in the hospital for an extended period of time, if there's no deal worked out between the local institution and the local marshal's office, it will be the marshal's responsibility to take custody of that particular inmate. So, but back to your original question, yes, he is definitely taken out at that time, and I'm sure this arrangement was made weeks in advance to make sure that technician or that clinician was going to be available to take a look at whatever issues that he may be experiencing right now, so that way, you know, there's not a whole lot of onlookers. And then even with staff and other inmates, it gives them not an opportunity to make a call, you know, to their family. Hey, I think, you know, Diddy's going out to the hospital right now. If anybody wants to take a look at him, you know, head out there. And then I think the other thing, Sierra, is since there are no cameras in the courthouse throughout this process, we've only been getting the sketch artist views of their perspective of what he looks like. And I think people have been talking about him losing weight and different things of that nature. So I know folks will probably want to be able to get a photo of him to see what he actually looks like. And
this attack feels less like a coincidence and more like the next chapter in a calculated takedown, one that's happening both inside and outside prison walls. In the immediate aftermath, Diddy was rushed to the prison's medical unit under heavy guard. The section where the attack took place was locked down, inmates were herded back to their cells, tempers flared, and whispers traveled faster than the guards could move. By the time the lockdown lifted, everyone knew exactly what had happened, and word had already started leaking to the outside world. Diddy's legal team team wasted no time. Within hours, they filed an urgent motion demanding that he be moved to a higher security wing or placed in protective custody. In a statement to the press, his lead attorney called the incident a catastrophic failure of prison security and warned that without immediate changes, Diddy's life was in serious and imminent danger. Inside sources say the prison administration is already facing heat from higher up, as high-profile inmates are supposed to be closely monitored to avoid exactly that.
Anyway, the defense highlights how modern-day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency sweep that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a...
This kind of incident, the fact that a coordinated attack could happen and in such a visible location, raises serious questions about whether prison officials turned a blind eye, underestimated the threat, or simply lost control. The details are grim. Sources claim Diddy suffered multiple injuries, cuts, bruises, and possible fractures. Though officials are staying tight-lipped on the exact extent, some reports suggest that at least one inmate had smuggled in a makeshift weapon. Others say it was purely hand-to-hand, but the level of coordination among the attackers has led to speculation that this was planned well in advance. The motive, that's where things get even darker. In prison, fame can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, your name carries weight. On the other, it makes you a target. Some inmates might want to make a name for themselves by taking down someone high profile. Others might have a personal grudge, fueled by stories from the outside. And then there's the possibility, whispered among those who know how the system works, that the attack...
And if he does have issues with his legs, is he walking with a limp? Does he have does he have a cane or anything like that? So yeah, I think that will be the reason why that they would make this, take this measure, which I have never seen in my career. Someone taken out to the hospital at this time of night for something as basic as an MRI.
Oh, that's interesting that this is the first time you've ever seen anything like this, because there have been high profile inmates at MDC in the past, maybe not to the level of P. Diddy. You had a lot of answers in that one answer, so many different roads I could go down. And I agree with you 100%. People would want that photo. We would be talking about that photo today if for some reason we got it. So that's a super valid point. I wanted to go back to the very beginning though, because how does all of this start? Does P. Diddy go to one of the corrections officers and say, hey, my knee's really bothering me, I'm not feeling well? Would he go to an infirmary on site? What would the early process look like?
So again, after that initial review of his current medical situation during his physical, and then there's follow-up to that process if there's something found, immediately. But, you have to understand daily there are medical staff walking through the units, doing what we call sit call and asking inmates, are they okay? And then you have folks that are walking around passing out meds and different things of that nature. And then he can also reach out to the medical team by what we call an inmate to staff correspondence form, whether electronically or in writing. And he can say, hey, I've had chronic issues with my knee for several years. And I'm seeing there's reports that after he ran New York City Marathon in 2003, that he had some ongoing issues with one of his knees. So that's how that initial process would start. And then if it's nothing like emergent, because again, if his knee was bothering him to the point where he fell out or something like that in the evening, then obviously they would take him to the hospital right away. It wouldn't be a thing where they would schedule that out. But in terms of something that basic, that would have to be looked at well in advance, and then they would make that appointment and then reach out to the hospital staff and say, hey, can you get someone that can, one, keep their mouth shut, that's going to be on schedule to work overtime or switch their schedule to do this particular procedure? Can they keep their mouth shut and not expose that, hey, we're going to bring him out into the community for a couple of hours to do this process? So there had to be some high level planning, not just at the local institution and the local hospital, but obviously probably at the regional office level and maybe even at the DOJ level, saying that, hey, this individual is going to be going out for a short period of time to make sure that they're taking care of these issues that he may or may not be having with his knee.
Yeah, the planning into all of this, based on what you're saying, does sound like it was pretty specific, that they wanted to make sure everything went through smoothly. And I wanted to ask you about the logistics. I know we've talked about this before, transporting Diddy to court, which we've seen him there several times. I mean, at least the sketches. Our reporter there has seen him in real life, but we've seen the sketches. As far as this goes, though, with him going to the hospital, is it different? I mean, would he be in his jumpsuit? Would he have cuffs?
PAC wasn't just about prison politics, but tied to Diddy's ongoing legal troubles and the dangerous industry rivalries he left behind. After the assault, Diddy was rushed to the prison's medical unit, where he was treated under tight security. Guards reportedly locked down the entire section, moving other inmates to different areas to prevent retaliation or further incidents. But the damage was already done, not just to Diddy physically, but to the perception of his safety. If someone with his resources, influence, and notoriety can be attacked like this inside a supposedly secure facility, what does that say about the system's ability to protect high-profile inmates? Meanwhile, the public reaction has split down the middle. On one side, loyal fans are expressing outrage, demanding answers, and flooding social media with hashtags calling for Diddy's safety. On the other, critics argue this is simply the reality of prison life, that behind bars, fame doesn't make you untouchable. In fact, it makes you a bigger target. Industry insiders are whispering too, and their theories are even darker. Some believe the attack was orchestrated not by inmates alone, but with influence from the outside. They suggest that in the world Diddy comes from, enemies don't just disappear. When you're sentenced, sometimes they follow you into the most secure places.
Fourth Amendment. The fact is, the BOP investigator is part of a law enforcement team that operates independently from the case team and is emphatically not a member of the prosecution team. But the defense cried foul. They said officials had taken photos of notepads that had the words legal written on them, meaning they were protected notes by attorney-client privilege. But there was some confusion about when the word legal was written on the notepad. In the end, the judge had the prosecution throw out 19 pages of material and said they couldn't use it as evidence to deny bail at an upcoming hearing. As I mentioned, Combs ended up being denied bail anyway. And as an interesting side note, the response from the defense was due on Friday, December 27th, but lead counsel Mark Agnifilo wrote to Judge Arun Subramanian saying that the MDC had told them all legal video teleconferences would be canceled between Christmas Eve and the day after Christmas. Agnifilo wanted to be able to speak with his client about the response, so asked for a small extension, which the judge granted. So the defense has continued to argue that Combs' rights were violated, and they want to have a hearing about it. Monday's filing reads, quote, "It is indisputable that a BOP investigator based in West Virginia had been feeding Mr. Combs' jail communications to the prosecutors. It is also indisputable that he traveled to New York for a BOP sweep ostensibly aimed at potential corruption and contraband at the MDC, and that despite finding none, he inspected and copied Mr. Combs' privileged notes. At the very least, this egregious invasion of Mr. Combs' constitutional rights raises numerous questions that can only be answered through a discovery and an evidentiary hearing." The filing continues to state, quote, "The government's breezy response stoops to unjustified and irrelevant mudslinging and mischaracterizes the controlling case law and the key facts about the filter team protocol. Apparently lacking any concern for the fairness of these proceedings, the government minimizes the breaches of Mr. Combs' privilege and privacy, hoping the court will accept its unsworn say-so and not bother with a hearing. The defense has repeatedly presented sworn testimony and evidence, but the government offers no actual evidence supporting its slippery and inconsistent claims about the underlying facts sufficient to meeting the controlling legal standard. Instead of submitting, for instance, a sworn declaration by Investigator 1 explaining what happened and why, the prosecutors expect the court to simply accept their unsworn hearsay assertions, even though they are self-contradictory and provide few answers to the legal questions. The court should refuse to do so. It should insist on sworn testimony from Investigator 1 and the production of his written communications with the prosecutors. A hearing is the only way to find the true facts so the court can assess how best to remedy this grave violation of Mr. Combs' constitutional rights. The defense argued that the court needs to dig deeper into the Bureau of Prisons' reasons for the raid instead of just taking the prosecution's word for it. The defense argues, quote, "The issue
Imaginable. For Diddy himself, this is a devastating turning point. Not long ago, he was living in penthouses, traveling by private jet, commanding respect and attention wherever he went. Now he's facing the cold, hard reality of prison, a place where reputation means nothing if you can't defend yourself physically, where alliances shift with the wind, and where every day brings a new potential threat. What happens next will depend on whether the court grants his legal team's request for heightened protection, but even if they do, this incident will hang over him for the rest of his sentence. If the attack was indeed a message, then Diddy will be forced to live with the knowledge that someone, somewhere, wants him broken, and possibly worse. And in prison, as every seasoned inmate knows, once you've been marked, you're never truly safe again. This isn't just another scandal. This isn't just another headline in a long list of controversies. This is survival, and for a man who once built his life on control over his image, his empire, his narrative, that control is gone. The power has shifted and the next move isn't his to make. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a moment. Tap the video on your screen now, and I'll see you in the next one.